If the word gospel means good news, one might wonder, where's the good news in this passage? At first glance, it doesn't sound like good news at all, but I think if we take a closer look at it, it just might be the perfect text for the days in which we live. It opens up with Jesus and his followers taking a lovely stroll around the beautiful temple grounds. The temple had recently been refurbished by Herod the Great, and apparently the work had been done very well. The rebuilding project had taken 46 years to complete and included new foundation walls through which Herod had significantly enlarged the temple. Sparing no expense, he used the best materials for the project, such as white marble that was up to 67 feet long, 12 feet high, and 12 feet wide. Blue, scarlet, and purple Babylonian fine linen tapestries formed a veil at the entrance, with gold and silver-plated gates and gold-plated doors throughout the temple. Everyone was admiring the beauty of it all when Jesus delivered the horrible news. The temple would soon be completely destroyed. And he coupled this bad news with more of the same. Nation will rise against nation and empire against empire, he told his listeners. Earthquakes, famine, plagues, persecution, betrayals, and even death. It would have sounded like the end of the world to the people. And sure enough, some 40 years later, the temple's destruction would indeed come to pass. Jerusalem was completely destroyed at the end of the siege, and according to the Jewish historian Josephus, 1.1 million people were killed. Of those who survived, both armed rebels and frail citizens were put to death, and all of Jerusalem's remaining citizens became Roman prisoners. 97,000 people were enslaved. And of those, thousands were forced to become gladiators and eventually died in the arena. Others were forced to assist in the building of the Forum of Peace and the Colosseum. And those under 17 years of age were sold into slavery. For Jewish survivors of the siege, it felt like the end of the world. And if asked what it felt like waking up on Wednesday morning to the news of the election results around the country, many people, like some of us in Texas and Florida, would have said it felt like the end of the world for us too. Everything we had fought for, everything we had hoped for, all our dreams for the future were dashed. Gays and lesbians are more afraid than ever that the rights that were afforded us with marriage equality will be taken away. If women and people of color had any hope of improvement in their lives, right-wing extremists have been given license to put an end to that hope. Transgender and non-binary people fear that more than ever they will be targets of violence. And conservative legislation will ensure that the earth will continue to die at an alarming rate, refugees will be thrown under the bus, health care will be reserved for the privileged, and hunger and poverty will become more and more of a global problem. It feels like the end of the world. But almost from the beginning of the world, people have been predicting the end of the world. In the 1970s, Hal Lindsey's bestseller book, The Late Great Planet Earth, compared the current events of the times to the end-time prophecies of the Bible. And then there was the Left Behind series, 16 novels about the end times published at the turn of the century and focusing on events described in the Bible as the Great Tribulation. And I swear people were all but lifting these novels up as sacred literature. And do you remember the panic that surrounded the Mayan calendar, which seemed to predict the end of the world in 2012? And lo and behold, we're all still here, thanks be to God. That "we're still standing" sentiment was recently expressed in a Facebook post by Florida MCC minister Reverend Robert Griffin, who said, "When you come from a heritage that survived slavery and Jim Crow, and your father was a sharecropper, and your mother was a domestic, and you survived AIDS in the Reagan years and sodomy laws, and you waited almost 50 years for marriage equality, today is just another day. Florida racists, transphobes, science deniers, homophobes, and womb colonizers, have your day. What I know from a long memory is that evil can't stand forever. Your mischief won't last forever, but I and people like me will." And that's what I hear Jesus saying in this morning's text. It's easy to be so overwhelmed by the bad news in the text that we miss his concluding words of encouragement when he tells the people to endure for the sake of their souls. And in his words that follow this morning's text, he says, "Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Jesus was trying to tell the people and all of us that even when it seems like the world is going to hell in a handbasket, hold on, because God has not abandoned us and never will. And so what do? How do we manage when our world feels like it's ending? Where do we go from here? In these days, as we face climate change, war, political and religious extremism, the renewal of talk of nuclear conflict, the loss of species, the violent persistence of white supremacy, and other dangers, how do we carry on? Well, I think retired Episcopal Bishop Stephen Charleston has some words of wisdom to offer. He writes, "I will start from here." He goes on to say that is an interesting spiritual statement when you stop to think about it. It means that whatever happened before and whatever may happen in time to come, the past and the future are not the sacred space I actually inhabit. That space is right here, right now, in whatever condition I find myself. This is what I have to work with. This is where change and hope begin for me. Recognizing my location on the map of the holy is one more way that I claim my place of blessing and announce to the universe, I will start from here. And for me, starting from here means that after having raised funds for hungry people over the last several weeks, today I will walk in solidarity with others who have done the same. Starting from here means that the days that I am in the church office this week, I will put food into the hands of people who are hungry. It means that next Sunday I will lift my voice in protest and in lament for the hundreds of transgender people who died this year due to anti-transgender violence. I will not be silent. It means that the next week, I and others will gather in our social hall to continue the work of mapping out a plan for a local non-discrimination ordinance that includes LGBTQIA+ people. This is how I will respond to the people who try to put an end to my world as I know it. I start in this holy space called the here and now, and I work with what I have been given, and I will endure. What I will not do is place all my hopes in a politician, Republican or Democrat, as if they are the Messiah who will fix everything for me. If anything is going to be fixed, it's up to you and me to get off our blessed assurances and get to work, because it's not the end of the world after all. Amen.